Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thanks so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So I know how much weddings can add up so quickly, and I know you are all looking for ways to save money on your weddings. So today we're gonna talk about the best ways you can stretch your decor budget for your wedding and save money on your overall wedding decor. The number one thing that will likely help you save money when it comes to your wedding decor is to DIY certain things. Now I'm putting a disclaimer out on this point because when it comes to DIYing things for your wedding, you want to be DIYing within reason. You don't want to DIY everything just because it's going to save you money and it's going to be more cost efficient. If you are not somebody that is super crafty, if you're not somebody that has a lot of extra time on your hands to do all these DIY projects, I don't recommend using this method to save money. Yes, it can save money, but it comes down to whether you value your time or your money. And if you are someone that does not have a whole lot of time, DIYing a lot of things for your wedding is going to end up being a lot more stressful than you need and want it to be. You want to make sure to have realistic expectations when it comes to DIYing things for your wedding. I also recommend doing a little bit of research when it comes to DIYing certain things for your wedding. If you are going off of an inspiration photo you saw on Instagram or Pinterest and you think that you can DIY it yourself, maybe do a little bit of research and find out if that person that you saw the photo of did it themselves. Maybe get some recommendations and pointers on how to successfully DIY that project, because sometimes I see couples and I see brides seeing things that they think they can DIY and it ends up being a lot more involved than they anticipated it to be, or that person that DIY'd that certain project has a lot of background in creating that certain project, or is an artist or something that is going to make it a lot easier for one person to DIY something than it is for somebody else. So again, proceed with caution when it comes to DIYing things for your wedding, and don't completely overboard your workload with DIY projects. Also, one more thing I'll say about DIYing things for your wedding: if you do plan to do a lot of DIY projects, do them far in advance for your wedding. So if you have a place to store things, I highly recommend doing them as early as possible so that you are not cramming the week before your wedding to finish all of these DIY projects that you need to do. Number two, renting versus purchasing, or purchasing used items. So when it comes to things like vases or signs or easels or stuff like that, it's typically a lot more cost effective to rent these items than it is to purchase them. If you do wish to purchase them, I highly recommend looking into used items. There are tons of wedding pages on things like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, even eBay. And that way, not only are you saving a little bit of money, but it's also better for the environment to be kind of reusing all of these items that only get used for one specific event, and then they just sit in someone's garage or they get thrown out and they end up in a landfill somewhere. So reuse whatever you can, purchase things that have already been used, and rent items rather than purchasing brand new. On the topic of repurposing, I highly recommend being able to repurpose whatever you can from your ceremony to your reception. If you're having your wedding ceremony and reception in the same space, this is going to make things a lot more easier. When it comes to especially things like your flowers for your ceremony and reception site, flowers are one of those things that add up very, very quickly. And when it comes to having an overall flower budget, if you are trying to stick to a smaller flower budget or a smaller decor budget in general, that can suck up a lot of it. So rather than running the risk of having it feel a little bit too empty or not having enough flowers or decor in your ceremony space or your reception space because you're just spreading that out a little bit too thin, something that I don't see couples utilize nearly enough is repurposing flowers from your ceremony space into your reception space. So I highly recommend talking to your florist about being able to repurpose whatever you can. Typically, if you are having an actual physical altar that you're having a floral install onto, it's going to be really difficult to repurpose that. So I wouldn't go in with that intention, especially if you're getting married outside. Those things get hung and installed earlier in the day, and if it's a windy day or if it's a really hot day, those florals may not even look that great after your wedding ceremony. However, if you are able to, things like your aisle decor, or if you're having some arrangements just kind of at the start of your aisle, speak with your florist about making those movable, so not having them built right into the ground, and that way you can utilize whatever decorations you have at your ceremony and be able to repurpose them at your reception space. This way, it's almost like having one decor budget for each spot and being able to just kind of move that for everything rather than trying to stretch your overall decor budget across two locations. A note on this: if you do plan to repurpose items from your ceremony to your reception space, this is especially when having a wedding coordinator or a day of coordinator is especially helpful. That way you have somebody that's going to assist in moving items from the ceremony to reception. Otherwise, you're going to be responsible for that, or somebody else is going to, and you want to make sure that if this is your plan, that you have a proper way and an efficient way to execute this plan. So we've touched on flowers a little bit, so let's talk a little bit more about how to kind of stretch your decor budget in the way of flowers. So we talked about being able to repurpose ceremony flowers into the reception space, but reception space in general, when it comes to being able to scale back on that floral budget a little bit, if you are somebody that wants to have florals on your table, like kind of across your entire table, typically a floral arrangement, if you're just doing like one centerpiece arrangement, on your table, depending on the size of the arrangement and the size of the table, is typically about $60 to $80. This can easily be even more than that, but that's something to kind of keep in mind when you're tallying how much you're going to spend per table for flowers. If you're wanting to scale this back a little bit, but you still want to have flowers throughout your table, a good way to do this is just having loose stems and putting them in bud vases. I actually really like the look of using single stems and bud vases as well. I think it's very feminine, and it's a good way to add little pops of color without having to completely overdo it on your florals. Additionally, eliminate things that aren't important to you. You don't have to have all of the little details and all of the decor pieces if they don't matter to you. If you are not somebody that cares that much about the details, about the detail photos, about having every piece of your wedding decorated to some extent, just eliminate things that don't matter to you. So if you're somebody that's having a seating chart and you're going to have escort cards, you can just have very basic escort cards that have your guest's name on them and not have to do anything super fancy. I've seen some beautiful and very creative ways to incorporate your escort cards or having name settings on your place settings for each guest. And yes, they look beautiful. Yes, they make great photos. Yes, they look wonderful for your guests. If you're trying to stretch that decor budget as much as you can, and if those details don't matter to you that much, just eliminate them. Make it as easy as possible. This also goes for things like signage. You don't necessarily need signage for everything. It's nice to have a welcome sign. It's nice to have a sign if you need to direct guests where to go. You don't need to have a sign for every little thing. If you are having signature cocktails or if you're having some kind of specific bar menu, it's great to have signage for that. It's a good idea to have instructions for if you have a guest book that is not a self-explanatory guest book, or directing guests where to put gifts or cards or things like that, but you do not need to go overboard when it comes to signage. And finally, the best way to make use of your wedding decor budget is to lower your guest count as much as possible. I've talked about this many times in other videos, but your guest count is what's going to highly affect the overall cost of your wedding in general, but also specifically your decor budget. Because for the amount of guests you have, that directly relates to how many place settings you need, how many tables you need, which relates to how many linens you need, how many glasses you need, how many chairs you need, and everything else that comes with it. So if you're really looking for efficient ways to cut back on your wedding decor, scaling down on your overall guest count is going to be the easiest and quickest way to do this. When it comes to your wedding, there is so much beautiful inspiration out there now more than ever with Pinterest and Instagram. And while I love all of these beautiful weddings that we see inspiration photos for, you don't have to go over the top when it comes to your wedding decor. And there are plenty of ways that you can save money on the decorations for your wedding. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.